Welcome back. WNST. Friends at the Baltimore Brigade bringing football indoors to the Royal Farms Arena this Friday. Go to BaltimoreBrigade.com to learn more. Download that Monumental Sports app as well. The Washington Valor, the first victim of the Baltimore Brigade this week. Also brought to you by Howard Bank, a relentless commitment to being the best at everything they do. Providing our community and charity series heard each and every Thursday live on the internet. We got some great guests ahead this week, as well as brought to you by Cole Roofing. Commercial roof spaces, that wind, the rain, the bad stuff, the heat in the summer. Get your roof checked out. Cole Roofing's the folks that you want to trust. Bill Cole will be joining us shortly. This guy's joining us as a repeat offender. He is a comic book guy. He's also a wrestling guy, but he's the NFL analyst at Bleacher Report. He's our pal out on Facebook and on Twitter, and you can follow his journey at the Bleacher Report or at the OBR on Twitter, or at Brent Sobleski out on Twitter, as he's toweling off after yet another exciting Wrestlemania. You, Luke Jones, Dennis Kolatzis, everybody around here was Wrestlemania-ing on Sunday night while I was busy talking about the National Football League.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a great weekend altogether now for professional wrestling fans. It isn't simply WrestleMania anymore. So WrestleMania unto itself is essentially the Super Bowl of professional wrestling. We've always known that, but I mean in how it's presented today. We're talking about 5 hours of professional wrestling on a Sunday evening, and that doesn't include some of the quote-unquote pregame leading up to it. And then even before that, Saturday night, you have the NXT, which is essentially the minor league for the WWE. And even before that, depending on how far you go into the breadth of professional wrestling, you have Supercard of Honor, which is Ring of Honor's biggest event of the year. So you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If you love professional wrestling, this past weekend was your creme de la creme and the biggest weekend of the year.
You know, I'm going to talk to Marvez about this and a couple of my, insiders. But, and I don't know McMahon. I've had him on the show at a variety of points, and I've seen his act, and I've seen the intimidation of Bob Costas, and, the stories are legendary. But doesn't he have some sort of NFL sort of wannabe thing that's been going on from the very beginning, where he sort of models a lot of this, and I feel like it's almost in both directions, where T.O. always wanted to be a wrestling superstar. The president of the United States would probably prefer to be doing a wrestling hit, right? And that it's changed the way sports and entertainment interact for sure, but he's always been sort of chasing the Super Bowl, and now he's got a football league too, right? He's always had to have his He loves what the NFL has built to some degree. Vince does, right?
Well, it's an interesting correlation, not necessarily just with Vince McMahon, but professional wrestling in general. When you look at, for example, Ric Flair, and how many of appearances has he made among professional athletes, among franchises, just in the last few years, because of his swagger, because of the ability to sell to the crowd, how influential he is outside his particular realm. And that does absolutely extend into the WWE and how they've presented itself, building an event like WrestleMania into something that's larger than life. And when you look at not just the athletes, but the organizations, the promotions, it's very similar in how they're developed from a business perspective. And yes, you're right that McMahon is once again looking into, or is on his way to restarting the XFL, which I find fascinating, because it seems like when you look at athletes, they always want to be something else, right? Basketball players want to maybe play football, or they want to become rappers.
Well, baseball players wanted to be Hollywood movie stars back in the 50s and 60s, right?
Exactly, and football players always want to be basketball players. So there's always what's always greener on the other side.
Everyone wants to be a sports radio show host. I've known that over 3 decades of doing it here.
Exactly. We're the guys that people want to be around or something.
Until you tell them something they don't want to hear. Then it's, you don't love the team enough. We got Brent Sobleski here. He's here from Bleacher Report, of course, and covering the National Football League. Just one more thing on wrestling, and I've been talking to almost anyone who wants to talk about this because we haven't had an opportunity. And look, I've been doing wrestling conversations here on the radio for 27 years. I was much more interested in it as a kid than I have become as an adult. I mean, we used to do Raw is War stuff and Mick Foley, and back when The Rock wasn't The Rock, when he was just Dwayne Johnson, and he was the wrestler's son, right? Or grandson, right? Peter Maivia, Rocky. Well, I know a little bit about wrestling. So the Andre the Giant era, like I'm a kid that grew up going to then the Baltimore Civic Center, that's now the Royal Farms Arena, where the Brigade are playing this week and where concerts come and all that stuff. Jimmy Buffett was here a couple weeks. And Andre the Giant would walk into that arena, and I saw Andre there, a good 15, 20 times in my life. And as a boy, I would walk down to the ring just to see how friggin' big he was. I stood next to him. I high-fived him as a little boy. So I don't have any pictures of it, but we didn't take cameras to the arena in 77 and 78. And I was there when Bruno got pinned by superstar Billy Graham with his feet on the ropes, all bloodied up. And I've had a variety of wrestlers on. But, boy, Andre's a little bit of the holy grail in all this, right? Like Hulk Hogan, Bruno still alive. Plenty of the wrestlers, Ric Flair still alive. His story's being told. Dusty Rhodes, dearly departed, and some others. But Andre, it's been a long time, and everyone has an Andre story. Everyone, right? I mean, who's of that era has an Andre story.
Absolutely. And I've been blessed, I feel, to a degree that I grew up through multiple golden eras of wrestling. I was a child in the 80s. And then I was in my teenage years during the Monday Night Wars, and now, again, how it continues to develop. I stopped watching professional wrestling for 15 years, basically between 2001 and 2016. And what got me back into it was my children, and what the different options that are available to you. It's not just watching one promotion now. You can look and find specific types of professional wrestling that fits your taste. And an extension of that is I have 3 young children. And my second youngest son, who's 8 years old, or going to be 8 years old this year, absolutely loves it. And one of the things I've sat down with them and my older son as well is shown them film, matches from Andre. He was the ultimate attraction. And no matter where he went, he sold out arenas, and it was constant. And even for a young child who was born, in this millennium, like my children were, they're still fascinated by him. My one son still says he's one of his favorite wrestlers. He never got to see him live. He never got to see, the build-up of these storylines or anything like that. But there's just this phenomenon that surrounds, the eighth wonder of the world, that even today, that we can come at, 18 years after his death, that he can have a feature on HBO, and it's so highly anticipated, and everyone wants to see it because he was such a fascinating man. And I've read his biography. I read there's a comic book about his life written by Box that I own. He was special, and it transcended what the sport was at the time, and continues to do so even in death.
He is Brent Sobleski. You can find him out at Bleacher Report, not just doing wrestling or wrestling history, but also the National Football League. He's the analyst here, and we're getting up on all things draft. I tell you, between the Stanley Cup playoffs, right? We had the Masters last weekend. The Orioles are playing. Whatever, dumpster fire that's going to happen there, we're going to witness it all. And we got lacrosse in this part of the world, and, but there's nothing like the NFL draft for me, and the juices get flowing a week or two before this thing to try to get to know the names. My wife and I always play the who's the coach of that team game, and who's the quarterback now? Where is Tyrod Taylor now? Where is Kirk Cousins at? Who's the quarterback of the Chiefs at this point? Who's the Redskins quarterback again? This is the time of the year to kind of learn all of that, and it all sort of folds together when you're a fan that if you have exhaled after the Super Bowl, if you weren't at the Combine like I was in Indianapolis, or following the owners' meetings and the rules changes and all the other Who Struck John with that at least you get sort of focused in for this weekend and saying, what are my team's needs? What's in the marketplace? How can our team get better? And certainly here, from the Ravens' perspective, I'll give them high marks on Crabtree and Smokey Brown at this point, but I need to see more. The grade's still incomplete. And as I've told everyone, this offense is never going to be deemed worthy until it goes out on the field, not even week one, but over the body of the work the first month or two to figure out what this offense is going to be, because it was so bad last year that you could drive that to the curb because almost all the parts are going to be different here this year.
Well, what I find fascinating about the Ravens and where they sit currently in the first round is they reside in limbo, as I call it. In the middle of the first round, you're looking specifically to become more explosive on offense, whether it be wide receiver, tight end, maybe even running back, depending on how they want to couple somebody with Alex Collins. And yet, at that selection, this is one of the weakest wide receiver classes, at least at the very top. Do you spend a top pick maybe on a center that early in the process? The tight ends most likely aren't going to come off the board until day 2. So what do you do if you're Ozzie Newsome entering your last year as general manager? And that's why I call it residing in limbo, because he has an option to make. And whether he's sitting there with that pick and someone falls to him so he gets the best overall value, or does he attempt to trade out so that he can address needs a little later in the process? So when I look at it, you're absolutely right. They need weapons. They have overhauled my receiver, but maybe not enough, at least not enough in my opinion, and they need to continue to add parts, because Joe Flacco is not the type of quarterback that's going to consistently carry your offense. That's been well established, and aside from the last Super Bowl run, he's not that quarterback.
Well, I don't know that he's going to be that guy when he's throwing to Ben Watson, half of Jeremy Maclin, and Brashad Perryman, right? Like I think that's part of it, and the running game being solid, that has to happen for Flacco, but that almost has to happen in a lot of offenses. Even Peyton Manning needed to run the ball a little bit. No,
correct, and you do need the cockpit to really succeed in the NFL. But I'm speaking specifically to being a meticulous passer, to be the consistent guy that can pick apart a defense. When I think of that, I think of Tom Brady, I think of Drew Brees, I think of guys that are able to consistently take what the defense is giving them. Now, I don't see that same consistency from Joe Flacco, and I think that's what prevents him from ever taking that step into the quote-unquote elite stage we often joke about with Joe Flacco. But, you're right. Now it's time to build around his skill set, and maybe he's not that meticulous passer, but what he is one of the best deep passers in the NFL. So you get speed, you get more guys on the outside like Brown who can really stretch the field vertically and be someone that takes the top off of a defense. Where they're lacking, at least in the wide receiver core, looking at their roster, is that presence that can consistently work the middle of the field. You may have guys on the outside who can get open. You have the physicality in Michael Crabtree. You have the speed in John Brown. Where's the guy that's going to work the middle as a slot receiver? Where's the tight end that can stretch the seam? These are the concerns. So you're looking to build upon areas you're currently lacking. The problem is, as I stated, you don't have that necessarily in the first round to select at that juncture to get that kind of talent. It could be available to you later, and as such, I would be looking in the middle of that first round to see whom falls to you, what type of talent. Maybe it's an outside linebacker. You want more pressure and someone to be the heir apparent to Terrell Suggs. Maybe you want to continue to build in a secondary or find another inside linebacker. These are all options that could be available to you, but you won't know until you're there on draft day waiting to see what the teams before you do. And if you're not entirely thrilled with what's available to you, then you strongly consider moving down, because there's going to be teams that want to move up to have assets. There are teams like the Browns, the Colts, the Patriots that have gigantic war chests in this year's draft, and they may want to maneuver around to target certain talents. And if they need to take advantage of that, as a general manager, Ozzie Newsome has done in the past and can do so again.
Well, I don't think dealing down is anything that would shock us or shock me for sure. And the one thing I've noticed historically over these mock drafts is there's always a ledge after 6, 8, 10, 12 players. Boy, the ledge in this one's really short. The ledge is 5 or 6 players that aren't quarterbacks that I see in everybody's top 15. The guys that aren't going to be there. I've even seen Roquan Smith, a couple of guys that maybe be there, but Mcglinchey's one of those guys that keeps getting mocked in their direction. Ridley, another guy. Obviously, offensive parts that would help Joe Flacco, that would help the offense. But the wide receiver part, other than G.J. Moore, I don't see anybody in the first round consistently, and that probably speaks volumes to that position and how they're not going to get as much help as maybe you stated in the draft through the wide receiver position. Then how do you get a player on the field who's going to be a starter in the first round to avoid this Perryman thing, to avoid this Matt Elam thing, to get a solid guy? Maybe it's a center, maybe it's a right tackle, maybe it's a tight end, but they don't have to take those guys at 16. The question is, who's coming up to get Ridley? Is that the Cowboys? Which quarterback? Jackson may be on the board. I mean, I'm doubting the Baker Mayfield thing. I just hear too much about him to believe that he's going to sit in the room like Aaron Rodgers for a couple of hours,
What I found interesting about the two examples you gave, Nestor, was, first of all, Calvin Ridley is someone that may be overrated to a degree, not necessarily because of skill set, although there are concerns with him becoming that true number one wide receiver. He's great separating, and that's where his bread is buttered, but he's also not the guy that's going to consistently win you 50-50 balls because he is of his slight frame. And furthermore, he's going to be 24 years old as a rookie. That's a knock for teams, and it should be when you consider how much developmental time you're giving up coming into the league at that age. And then the other you mentioned was Mike Mcglinchey, who is the consensus number one offensive tackle prospect, yet I wouldn't consider him a top 20 prospect overall. He has the ability to start long-term on the blind side, but there are concerns about whether he has the overall athleticism to stay on that side. So this is the conundrum you face. And whether it be a wide receiver specifically, I think you can start looking at finding certain skill sets to fit within what you need. And for example, there's depth within that position in the middle rounds. That doesn't necessarily have to be a high-end pick to contribute early in your career. Whether you're looking at someone like Dante Pettis or Anthony Miller or Christian Kirk in the second to third rounds, those guys who can work immediately out of the slot and provide you a different skill set than what you have already on the roster. This is the way I always harken back to something I heard Brian Billick say. You want to build your wide receiver core like a basketball teams. You want varying different skill sets. You want the tall guy on the outside. You want the point guard who can make all the moves over the middle. That's exactly what you're looking to accomplish when you're really trying to vary up your passing offense. And that's where I think the Ravens can really succeed, not necessarily by taking that guy in the first round, whether it be a DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, but looking at guys with specific traits that can step in and fill a gap within your offense. And to me, that's where the strength of that wide receiver class is, and not necessarily early in the draft.
Quoting no higher source than the great Brian Billick, our partner here on behalf of the Living Classrooms Foundation. He is Brent Sobleski. He's out of Bleacher Report and the OBR, as well as at Brent Sobleski on Twitter. This portion of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Jockey Club. Cure the Winter Blues. We got the Tessio Stakes coming up on the 21st. A couple Saturdays from now, we had Stan Salter joining us here. You can hear that out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. The entries for Laurel on the front page of WNST.net, as well as in our morning newspaper, shipped digitally to you each and every morning at 7 a.m. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, along with the Maryland Jockey Club and the Preakness and all the Preakness festivities now just 6 weeks away out at Hi-Ho Pimlico. Also brought to you by our friends at Box Hill Pizzeria. The best crab cakes in Harford County can now be shipped anywhere in the world, including out to Ohio, where Brent is. You go to BoxHillPizzeria.com to do that. And if you've been up there lately, you know they're remodeling the showroom floor in the pizzeria. They're expanding. They're adding more seats, making Box Hill even bigger and better. If you see Tommy and Chris, tell them the place is looking good up there. I keep seeing the pictures popping up on my social media. BoxHillPizzeria.com. Our friends up in Abingdon and Harford County with those fantastic crab cakes. I call it the crab cakeria. Brent Sobleski is our guest. He is at Bleacher Report as well as at the OBR. We're discussing the Ravens. And I don't think you could discuss the Ravens without how all the rest of this thing sort of pieces together, right? Teams ahead of them, behind them, and where we are with these quarterbacks. It's quite the haul on the quarterbacks yet again, right? We're 2 weeks out, and there is paranoia, panic, all of that stuff that's going to cause 5 guys to get drafted ahead of 15 other football players who are going to be better football players. Somewhere in there, there's a bust. My guess is it's whoever the Browns take.
Well, let's point something out. That on the outside, there's an outside chance 6 quarterbacks could go in the first round if we include Oklahoma State's Mason Rudolph. And
you don't like the kid from Richmond going in the first round, do you, right?
No. Late second, third round talent. When I look at this year's class, I'm actually enamored with it. I believe it's much stronger than what we've portrayed it, at least through most of the process. I look at 3 quarterback prospects being legit top 10 talent, whether it be Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen, or Sam Darnold. These are guys that should be able to step in and have the potential to become faces of the franchise. Then you have guys slightly later who I believe are still first-round talents, but maybe not those marquee prospects like those I just named, those being Wyoming's Josh Allen and Louisville's Lamar Jackson. And what's important about this entire process is having a plan in place to develop all these young men, because aside from Baker Mayfield, the other 4 I mentioned, Jackson, Rosen, Allen, and Darnold, are 21 years old or younger. Sam Darnold can't even buy his first adult beverage until 3 months after he's going to be drafted in the top 10 overall. It gives you an idea of where these guys are so early in their maturation. They're still puppies.
Don't want to train them. I want to burp them, literally.
Yeah, exactly. And we've expedited this process to such a degree that you expect that if you take the quarterback in the first round, he's going to play at some point during his rookie year. And that's not necessarily the best case scenario for any of these young men. Long term, it could truly help them to allow them to sit for an extended period of time and then let them take over. But just because of their youth, just because of we understand their strengths and weaknesses within all of their skill sets, you just need to place them in a position to succeed. And we say that over and over and over again every single offseason, only to see those plans go up in flames once the bullets start flying during the regular season. So when I'm looking at this class, whether it be number 1 with the Cleveland Browns or the multitude of teams that will be looking either to draft them early in the process or potentially trade up, they need to do so with the fact in mind that each of these quarterbacks may take time to develop. And I think as a byproduct, we've seen this offseason how many of those teams have gone after veteran options, whether it be Case Keenum in Denver, Sam Bradford in Arizona, Tyrod Taylor in Cleveland, A.J. McCarron in Buffalo. These are examples of teams preparing themselves to bring in one of those quarterbacks, yet not have to rely on them immediately in the process. And to me, that's the smartest route to go, because if you want to maximize these young men's potential, they're going to need time. They're going to need development. And if you don't have the right pieces in place, they could be ruined very early in their careers without ever seeing their full skills on display.
He is Brent Sobleski. You can follow his journey and wisdom on all things comic books, professional wrestling, but most importantly, the National Football League, out on Twitter at Brent Sobleski, as well as out on a Bleacher Report. Any thoughts about the offseason? I keep saying the Rams and the Eagles have sort of won the offseason. Some people have disputed that the Rams may have had subtraction by addition in Sue and some of these other guys, but I'll leave that for, I'll let the 16 games speak for themselves next year, but they were a pretty good team last year. I know what they're trying to build out there. We have the Chargers on the schedule, so we're going to play out there this year. I said I hope it's one of those weird weekends where they both play so I can go see a game, a real National Football League game at the Coliseum at some point in my lifetime. But because I know once the mausoleum gets built over in Inglewood, all bets are off at that point. But look, I look at teams trying hard in the offseason, and I see free agency, bad money being spent, and things like Ryan Jensen getting $12 million a year in Tampa Bay that I still scratch my head and say, nice guy, nice person, nice center, but really? And that's been a story around here for him and Wagner and Osemele, where you go out in the market, you say, how much are you paying these days for somebody else's center, somebody else's tackle? And then there's the quiet offseason of the Ravens, where Crabtree's a big addition, but they've lost a couple of guys. The draft's everything about how this thing gets built. And look, the Browns are going to win draft day. I laugh about that. I make jokes or whatever, but and so are the Patriots, because they have all of that. They've built up the artillery to win draft day. But the games start again in September, and these are the crucial times of the year, and these decisions that are getting made in these war rooms on where to stack these guys to say, I want that football player.
Well, the last 2 teams you mentioned fascinated me. Not just because I'm in Ohio with Cleveland, but because of the route they've taken after accumulating that war chest and so much salary cap space and losing so much in the last 2 years. And now it's time. Now is the payoff. Now is when we see the end or the beginning of the end of the process, as they call it with the Philadelphia 76ers. Can you finally start building towards something? And you make those moves and use that capital you built for established veterans, whether it be Tyrod Taylor, Demarius Randall, or Jarvis Landry. 3, in my opinion, trades that improve their roster significantly, much to the point where you can compete maybe with the Ravens and Bengals. Not with the Steelers yet. Obviously, the Steelers are the top of the AFC North, but there's far less of a deviation than what we saw coming out of into the offseason. Now, whereas on the Patriots, you have the flip side of the coin. You have the team who has clearly been the best team in the AFC, coming off a Super Bowl loss, and they've suffered a couple key losses. They wanted to retain Nate Solder to keep Tom Brady's blindside clean. And the fact of the matter is they weren't able to close the deal, and he signed the biggest deal in offensive line history with the New York Giants. So now you have a glaring hole at left tackle that you have to address with a 41-year-old quarterback. On top of that, your most productive receiver from last year is now been traded to the Los Angeles Rams. And I understand there's long-term financial implications that apply to that situation, but Nick Cooks was a legitimate weapon with your offense. How do you replace him? And you have this transition with the Patriots that we've seen consistently under the Belichick and Brady era that makes their dynasty special. But it also makes them vulnerable, especially now due to the age found within that backfield at quarterback, and even Bill Belichick going on 66 years old and nearing retirement in some juncture. So I think when we look at the Patriots and what has occurred, at least in the last couple of months, they may be taking a step back finally. And can other teams continue in the AFC capitalize and work their way towards finally knocking them off the proverbial hill and improve, and have they improved enough to do so? So I look at those two teams as those who have been the most interesting this offseason based on the moves that they did or did not make.
He is Brent Sobleski. You can follow his wisdom out at Bleacher Report as well as at Brent Sobleski out on Twitter. Always a great guest. We will check in again sometime after the draft and see how the Ravens wind up doing here. But pretty exciting couple weeks. And if you don't buy into all the hype and all the rumors of tradings ups and downs and all that, at least we get the schedule out of this at some point next week or the week after and can get our fall in line for all, let's say, social affairs, right?
Well, just remember one thing I will say about this time of year. It's a lot of fun to follow the NFL draft. There's a lot of innuendo, and just remember that it's lying season. So whatever you hear, take it with a grain of salt, please.
Well, we had the Liars Luncheon here last week, and just because Ozzie Newsome kicked it off with the truth, we have signed Robert Griffin. That doesn't mean that anything happens after that's the truth. So I'm totally with you over the next couple of weeks. Part of the fun is, that night there is some drama built into this. There's some storylines built into this naturally, and then there's more of the, if this happens, this team's going to deal there. They want this player. They've targeted this player. What whispers go to what journalist, who gets it right, who gets it wrong, and who's getting fished.
And for the rest of us, we're out here with our Dakota rings, and all we got as an answer is drink more Ovaltine.
You know what I tell DaCosta and all these guys now? I said, I don't even bother asking you. I don't really want to put you in a position to lie. I don't want to be lied to. And I get why you wouldn't want to tell me the truth. I mean, I totally understand that. So, he lied to me once about Marte Jenkins. 20 years later, I've never forgiven him. And, since
There's nothing
then,
wrong with that. You just got to know who to trust and who not to, and quite frankly, and build off the things that we ourselves have ascertained through the last 6 months.
But your point is not to trust anybody over the next 2 weeks, and I guess that's the way I'm going to play it.
Well, that's a good point. Good point. And you know what? The way you should play it, because at this juncture, most of the hay's in the barn, and it's time to get on with the draft. I get anxious at this point, to be quite frank.
I think Ozzie Newsome said, I judge with my eyes, what I see on the tape, what I see on the film, right? So for me, I judge the draft by what I see with my eyes on April 26th, which is if you draft Brashad Perryman, I see that. I don't know why, but I see, then we judge what they actually do, not what they might have done or could have done or should have done. This is when they get to say, I want Marlon Humphrey Humphrey instead of O.J. Howard, right? Or I want Ray Lewis instead of Leland McElroy.
For me, to be quite honest with you, I love that debate. I love the philosophical viewpoint of the NFL draft because as someone who covers it and has done so for nearly 15 years, I love the fact that you can be right and wrong on every single draft pick. You may be right where the guy is selected, but may be wrong on his ultimate potential or vice versa. And then furthermore, one thing we do not discuss that we should far more is situation. We can look at it and say, well, they drafted him here, he's a bust. But why is he a bust? What happened between that point where he was so talented coming in out of college to the point where he's out of the NFL in 3 to 5
if Tim
years?
Couch would have gone to the Patriots, would it have been different? I don't know. I really don't know.
I sat down and talked to guys within the league, and the quote that was told to me that it still blows my mind today. A scout looked at me directly in the eyes and said, I don't know how any of these guys are successful due to all the mitigating circumstances that come into their lives after being drafted. And that just gives you an idea of how much these young men have to take on in a very quick period of life and still be expected to succeed. It's very difficult. This is not an easy transition, and yet we continue lambast them long after the fact because if they're not successful.
Well, I talk to Ryan Leaf about that every year when he comes to the Super Bowl, and, he's 20 years later a punchline and still trying to clean his life up, and nobody had it better than him that day, right? He got drafted, he got all the money, and then you have to go perform, and, that's where that's what they're really trying to judge, will you come in and put your head down and be a professional, or are you going to be Johnny Football, right?
Yet the same Ryan Leaf just recently went on the radio and said Josh Rosen should try to force, or Sam Darnold should try to force themselves out of Cleveland if they're drafted number 1 overall. That's the mentality you want from your quarterback? Yeah.
Hey, as long as the Browns are in the division and they keep screwing up, I'm all for it, I rue the day when karma catches up and the Browns get even with everybody.
Well, we'll see, because if they take Josh Allen number 1 overall, I know that's an article I'm going to be writing in the next few days, that it could be the biggest mistake in franchise history.
If the Cubs can win, if the Red Sox can win, you know what I mean? If UMBC can win, the Browns can win. They're capable. They play in the league too. But beside that, I see that they've inserted McLuhan. I saw that out on your Twitter feed as well. Always great to visit with you, Brent. Take care of yourself. We'll see you after the draft, all right?
Thank you, Nestor, and enjoy.
They're going to pick some football players on the 26th, 27th, and 28th. Either way, all of our WNST programming brought to you by our friends at Fremont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. You need Carl Delmont and our friends at Fremont Mortgage. Also brought to you by our friends at Brooks Huff Tire and Automotive. That's Luke's Garage up in Shrewsbury. They can be your automotive helper anywhere along the I-83 corridor. They've been doing it for a long time. 5 locations now, from York down to Hunt Valley, Timonium, Towson, Brooks Huff. Anything under the hood of your car, featuring Goodyear products and the best service anywhere. It's Brooks Huff Tire and Auto Center. I am Nestor. I'm out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. So it's easy, it's free, it's awesome, it's there for you all the time. It is the buyatoyota.com audio vault. No static at all, just like Steely Dan sang, just like they'll be singing at the Modell Lyric in the fall. Modell Lyric is our new partner. Don't forget the Brit Floyd show is on the 26th. That's the music of Pink Floyd. That's also draft night. You can follow along on the on our text service and on our Twitter and everywhere else at the Brit Floyd show. And Jackson Brown coming to the Modell Lyric on May 3rd, as well as Kansas and Steely Dan later on in the year. We're looking to do some rock and roll around here. We're so privileged that the Modell Lyric is our partner, so we're excited about that part of life as well. Also excited about our friends at King Discount Liquors, lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Get to Rosedale and give the King a ring. Bring me back a bottle of Malbec. Tell Paul King I'm loving his new commercials, even though I'm not in them. Johnny Bev, too. I like Johnny Bev more than Paul. Tell him that. That'll get him laughing. Nasty at WNST.net, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.